Hello, and thank you for taking the time to download and look at this presentation on water use and resilience in the leisure sector. I think it may be useful to give a little bit of background to Environmental Solutions International. I've been involved in the golf and leisure sector since 1985, and more recently the last 20 odd years involved in management, facilities management and sustainability. A lot of the work that we do with our clients is looking at compliance, so handling, storage and disposal of hazardous materials and the compliance that relate to that, and also built environment, resource efficiency, emissions declarations on-site carbon sequestration, and creating an environmental and social governance balance sheet effectively for their environmental management. We are Gulf Environment Organisation Sustainability Associates, have been since 2012, and I think I'm right in saying that we're now approaching 40 verification visits on behalf of Gulf Environment Organisation. But I also work with Planet Mark as an associate, which is the Eden Project endorsed environmental certification. I've been working with them since 2018. I also sit on the GB&I Gulf Sustainability Committee. So, what do we know about water consumption in the Gulf sector? Well, we know that the consumption range is typically between 3,000 cubic metres per year and 150,000 cubic metres per year. We know that 66% of golf clubs use mains water for irrigation. That's a figure that comes from the water industry itself. We know that there are around 1,900 golf clubs in England, and of those nearly 1,000 are located within current areas of water stress. The other thing that we know is the geographical distribution. And if you look at those figures, the key one, the one that jumps out, is the 20% of golf clubs located in the Thames region, which is certainly an area of water stress. There are quite significant numbers of golf clubs, obviously, in and around other major conurbations and population centres, and it's what you would expect, that golf would gravitate towards areas where you have a customer base. But that also puts it into areas of great demand for other resources, water resources particularly. Over the last 50 years, as the slide suggests there, we've seen a near doubling of per capita consumption. We were in the 70s at around 80 litres per person per day. We're up, and it does vary across the road, but between about 145 and 160 litres per person per day currently. The water companies are also facing population growth, and the information that we have here has been taken from the National Framework for Water Resource, which we'll come on to a little bit later on, which is a planning document that the Environment Agency and the water companies are using as they're developing and planning their resource availability for the next 25 years. But this idea of the increase, particularly in the Thames region, I've unashamedly stolen this slide from a Thames Water presentation. A great way of looking at this is if you imagine the population of Manchester moving down to the Thames region, that is the volume of people that Thames Water are going to be having to look at. But it's not just Thames Water. If you look at the area from the Wash to the Bristol Channel on that population increase graph, you can see dark reds spread across large areas, South Midlands and through the southeast. And this is the problem that the water industry are currently trying to address along with the Environment Agency. So, in addition to population growth and having to accommodate and find the water for a very great increase in domestic supply, we're also facing less predictable rainfall, and I don't think any of us will forget the last few years. I mean, the figures that we have on screen here are summer 2017, 18 and 19, and you can see with 17 and 18 that we have large areas of the country covered in brown and quite deep browns, which indicates lower than average rainfall. Whereas 2019, and again if we look at the area from the Bristol Channel across to the Wash, north of that we had significant rainfall. Below that, if you look at the levels, it's white, which is average. There are areas of brown. There are one or two areas around South London where you've got blue, so you have higher rainfall totals than average, but not by much. So there is a split, if you like, in terms of the rainfall that we've experienced over the last few years, but we're also seeing very many more named storms. So the rainfall is coming at different times of year and different intensities. I'm sure everybody's going to remember the summer of 2018. And there we go, as a few images from 2019 and the floods that they had north of that line from the Wash to the Bristol Channel. So, since 2016, we've been working to increase awareness. We've been working with the Environment Agency, the water companies, the regional water resource groups, and the leisure operators and associations to try and improve that awareness. We've been creating seminars, workshops, podcasts, anything that we can do to actually highlight the issues that are going to be faced by the leisure sector as we go forwards. In 2018 and an updated report in 2020, we provided information again showing that the golf industry in England is having to face the real and definite prospect of the loss of the use of mains water. And that's not through any vindictive action by the water companies, that's just that there is not going to be sufficient supply going forwards. So we have to look at building water resilience plans. We have nearly 1,000 golf clubs in England which are located currently in areas of water stress, and that is only going to increase. Now in 2018, we were invited by the Environment Agency, because of the work that we'd done with them previously, to become a consultee through the development of the National Framework for Water Resource, and to provide an insight as to water use within the leisure sector. And along with a number of other industries that were invited on the consultation, the Environment Agency used that information along with the data that they have from a range of other government sources to develop the National Framework for Water Resource. The National Framework was adopted in March of 2020, and it sets on the left-hand side of the slide the timeline that the regional water resource groups have to work to in terms of developing and implementing the plans on water resource based on the availability that we have and the projected growth. On the right hand side in the green panel, you can see that the report highlights that if no action is taken between 2025 and 2050, that we are going to need in the region of 3,435 million extra litres of water per day. The other thing I'll point out from that slide in that green panel is that if you look at the regions, and they've got north, west, east, southeast and west country as the 5 regional water resource groups, each one of them is in deficit. Each one of them will need more water than they have currently available. The southeast is the most extreme, but this isn't restricted purely to the southeast, and I think that's a key thing to take away from this presentation. This isn't a problem of the southeast, this is a problem for the whole of England. In terms of the requirements placed on the regional water resource groups, there are a number of elements that they have to look at when they're implementing the project. They have to comply with the strategic and environmental assessments and habitat regulation assessments. That is a throwback to the fact that the condition of waterways in England is currently poor. The target is to have good ecological standard, and currently we only have 14% of watercourses we actually achieve that. So we're going to have to face the fact that we're going to have to leave more water in the environment. So this is going to impact abstraction as well. 3 up on that dark blue panel, the musts, I've highlighted with a little green arrow which says must be open to market mechanisms, and that's one of the methods that they might use to influence demand. And when you're looking at market mechanisms, it's quite a blunt tool. It does allow them the option to look at pricing and availability by time, whether that's periods during the day or periods of the year. So there are elements that they can use to do that, but they also have a requirement to minimise the impact on the economy. So the last thing they want to do is impact businesses by reducing water availability or to restrict economic growth. That's one of the key indicators. So there are a number of areas that they have to look at. If you look at should, the lighter blue panel there, the top one is to engage widely with interested groups. And that is a throwback to the consultation during the development of the National Framework for Water Resource, and also for this project and a number of similar projects that are going on currently. In a number of the seminars that we've run, there has been some confusion, particularly from the Gulf sector, about what a temporary use ban means for them. We have had clubs, course managers, general managers suggesting that because they're a business it doesn't apply to them, it's a hosepipe ban that only applies to gardens. If I can put that to rest, if you are irrigating a grass used for sport or recreation, or an area of grass used for sport or recreation, the temporary use ban applies to you. The only exemption you get is if you are hosting a national or an international tournament, and that's it. So if there is a temporary use ban brought in, you will not be able to irrigate your golf course from mains supply. And before we get all the people that have got abstraction licenses turning off at this point, there is also a Section 57 notice, which in an extreme event, the Environment Agency may request, a bit stronger than that. It's effectively a hands-off notice. So if you have a licensed abstraction volume, they can serve a notice on you to prevent you taking even within your license. And that really comes into place if water companies need the water elsewhere, or if the Environment Agency need the water elsewhere. And because of the environmental restrictions now, that might not necessarily just be for a spike in demand for potable, for domestic use, drinking water. That could be on environmental grounds. So there are three parts to the Water Use and Resilience project. But to start off, let's just say that environmental solutions have been retained by every single water company in England and Wales for this project. You can see a number of the logos there, but yes, this is a water industry project, and they're having to balance an excess of demand over the available supply. But we're also working with the 5 regional water resource groups. So the project itself. The first part of this project is to benchmark consumption. And as I say, you can always pause the slides and have a look at the fine detail on what we're actually doing. But this is the agreed specification, the scope for the project. So it's to look at leisure sector irrigation consumption, but to also identify the source. So we're going to get data from the Environment Agency on abstraction and the water companies on mains potable supply. But it's going to look at and identify, hopefully, sites where there are limited or no water available for abstraction, and the risks that they may face. So this isn't necessarily just a project where we're going to look at mains water supply, highlight the fact that there isn't going to be mains water supply, and just say, well, you can go and get an abstraction license, because it might be that you're in an area where there's no abstraction available anyway. We've been in discussions with the water companies about combined sewer overloads, so that's excessive surface water runoff. But the ecological standards, the water quality elements as well of the over abstraction that we've faced over the past 15, 20, 30 years, probably longer. The second part of the project is to engage with the national associations and governing bodies. So it's to have those discussions with the people who can influence the end users, the operators. So it's their representative bodies, to make the case, to help them understand the issues that are going to be faced, and to try and work with them to create seminars and workshop materials to help that educational process. But a big part of this is to discuss and develop and agree the strategies. It's how can we actually influence, because this ultimately is a demand management project. we need to have that buy-in. We need to have those discussions about the most effective ways and the safest ways and the quickest ways to help improve the sustainability of businesses that may be faced over the next few years with the loss of water. So it's finding the alternatives to make sure that that doesn't impact on their business, on their existence. And we're including discussions on land drainage. That offers an opportunity. I think we need to start looking at water as being a valuable resource rather than just shuffling it away from our sites, to actually hang on to it as much as you can in the winter, because you might well need it in the spring and summer. So again, you can always pause the slide. Who have we been engaging with? Well, you can see the list there. So we were looking and working with golf, horse racing, football, rugby, and a number of others. As far as the associations are concerned, Grounds Management Association, because they are integral to this in terms of their members being so wide-reaching in their remit and their work with different associations and organisations. So the third part of the project is looking at solution development. So again, it's identifying what the associations and the industry representatives can do to ensure the strategic aims, the idea of creating a descent plan, moving away from mains water and looking at alternative sources of water, looking at on-site storage, but also understanding what the decision-making process is around the use of water currently and how that may be influenced through the educational programme. Developing and agreeing a range of tactical tools, helping you using information that we can gather to put together into the pot, if you like, that mean that it makes it much easier when you're assessing the risk that you're facing, but also to find potentially the solutions. And encouraging facilities to make contact and volunteer specific data. The solutions development, we've put together special interest groups. So we've tried to draw on industry knowledge from the leisure sector, but also technical water resource knowledge from the Environment Agency and from the water companies. And we established 4 sort of discussion groups with either formal or informal meetings, but at least discussions, correspondence, to try and put together a small package of information that may help and guide clubs wishing to move on this journey down building in resilience to their water supply. And we looked initially at agronomy, so looking at cultivars and the management techniques for turf. We had some fantastic input on that from industry specialists, including the RNA and 1 or 2 others, which is absolutely brilliant. The thing that came out very clearly with that was that it's not necessarily just the fine turf element, that there are different reasons that irrigation is used for different industries. And I think the most striking there was with the horse racing industry, where it is welfare and safety as the critical element. So they're not quite so concerned about what they have on in the way of grass, but the ground has to be soft enough and present little friction, so that if there is a horse falling, that there is much less risk of it being injured and the jockey being injured. The second element was technology, and we've had some fantastic input from industry, from operators, but also from industry suppliers, giving us the information about where technology is heading at the moment, what you may be able to do to improve the efficiency of your existing application. Sustainable sources of water, a lot of the information that came from that came from the water industry themselves, and some fantastic knowledge that we're going to be able to tap into going forwards on sustainable water from specialists at the Environment Agency and the water companies. Very, very well qualified, very knowledgeable people that we will have to use going forwards to get the information to help us through this process of change. And funding, which has been highlighted as critical. We always knew it would be, but how can we generate the funding that's going to help you transition with larger capital projects, whether that's the installation of a reservoir or a number of other areas. But we need to try and tap into as many different sources of funding, and I think that's what we found, is that there are lots of different opportunities. I've mentioned land drainage, soft landscaping and flood resilience. That's one pot of money. Per capita consumption reduction, and every leisure facility, every leisure sector has a huge number of stakeholders, each of them representing a household. Well, that could tap into per capita consumption funding. We've got the new ELMS scheme, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is being developed currently, which is kind of replacing the high level stewardships, the EU systems that we had previously. And again, we need to look at those and how they might be able to provide funding for various projects. So we're trying to collate all of these various elements, but also to try and create projects that spread wide enough to be able to access a number of different sources of funding. So as I say, the groups have drawn on some fantastic specialist knowledge, and I thank everyone who's been involved in that process, because it has come up with some really, really good information. And hopefully, I've used the phrase here, creating the breadcrumb trail for the national associations to agree with their members. That's the toolkit. So hopefully we'll get to a point where there's enough information there where you can just follow a process. And we're going to back that up with a number of case studies. So what are the project outcomes? Well, the first one is the confirmation of water consumption posed by land abstraction in the leisure sector. We need to agree actions with the national associations. How are they going to access their members? How are they going to create that change? How are they going to create the awareness to create the change which is required to reduce our consumption, to protect their membership going forwards in the face of a reduction in the availability of water, or at least a diversion of the availability of water because of the priorities around the supply of mains potable water for potable use for drinking purposes. To provide detailed information, how you can manage your turf more efficiently, and that's going to be slightly different with each of the associations. Looking at best available technologies, looking at sustainable alternative sources, that may not be a complete 100% switch, but if you can use rainwater harvesting, which reduces the amount of mains water, fantastic, that's a good starting point. So it's looking at possibly multiple sources of alternative water to replace what you have been using or to minimise what you've been using from the mains supply. And then the funding opportunities. I've already said the complexities there, where we're trying to tap into as many different opportunities for funding based on different projects and putting all of those together, but we're trying to put them together in a package so that it makes it much easier to access, so that you know where to go, and then from that point of view, hopefully it will shorten the process. But one of the key things that came out within the discussions that we've had, the meetings that we've had, is the adoption of a leisure water charter to help create awareness and action. And that's not just awareness and action in operators, but it's also in participants. We have to get the message out there that actually water is a scarce resource. It is going to become scarcer as populations increase. We have to safeguard that supply. So there are going to have to be changes, and from the stakeholders' perspective, that's going to mean that they're going to have to accept changing management practices and not have a go at the general managers or course managers because the fairways are browning off. Well, that's just what we're going to have to face going forward. That's going to have to become the norm. But also to hopefully help influence the households that are associated with that, so that the per capita consumption may also be influenced, that we can use this as a per capita consumption project as well. So the water charter. This is a single page, bullet points, and we've got one set up as the water charter for the leisure association. So this would be for the governing bodies, the representative bodies to sign. And it's essentially encouraging engagement. It's encouraging them to take those steps through the process, to engage with the water companies and the regional water resource groups and environment agency, to look at how they might be able to help in this process. The second point, the second bullet point that we have there, encouraging the members to work with the water companies, that one, if you read it through, and again you can pause the slide, relates to excess demand situations on the main supply. And we've had periods through 2020 where there was insufficient supply of water. They couldn't process water. It wasn't the fact that they didn't have it in the reservoirs, but the process capacity for putting water into the mains had reached its maximum. There was no spare capacity, there's no headroom. and it meant that there were households that suffered low pressure because they couldn't actually maintain their pressure. And that was through 2020, where you had the staycations. We were obviously in the pandemic. You had a nice hot summer, spring. So you had lots of people at home, you had lots of car washing, you had lots of garden watering, you had lots of paddling pools being filled up, and you had the demands from other areas. So if we can set up a network which is going to work with the Environment Agency and the water companies, so that in the event of a repeat of that, and there is an expectation that that is going to happen in 2020, that we can do something similar, that as an industry we can act responsibly, that we can avoid peak time irrigation, that we can try and put that on overnight or create other times and maybe a little bit of storage. So it's working with the industry to find out the best way to achieve that so that it doesn't impact. So the key other point, I suppose, from this water charter is the bottom point there, which is to ensure that every member has developed a water resilience plan by 1st of January 2022. Now, clearly that's not very far away, but please don't be scared by that. If you're an association leader, chief executive, listening to this presentation, you've probably seen it before, most of it anyway, at various previous meetings. But the idea behind a water resilience plan is not that complicated. It's looking at where you're getting your water from currently, the risks that are associated with that, and where you might be able to get your water from. And we're putting together a sort of template on that process, but it will highlight what your opportunities are and where you might be able to look for alternatives. Part of this process, of course, with the Water Charter is that if you're signing up to the Water Charter, it makes it much easier for the water companies and the Environment Agency to see committed associations. If you've adopted this and published this Water Charter to create awareness, it makes it much easier when we're having the discussions about the associations and their members that are maybe going to get more direct assistance in the process of education with seminars and workshops and information to help them. So don't be scared off by the water resilience plan and the development by 2022. That is easily achievable. And then the leisure operator. So the leisure operator water charter kind of mirrors. It's very, very similar. So it's working with the regional water resource groups, Environment Agency, participating in the National Communication Network to quickly communicate. So that's the element where we can maybe take some of the pressure off through changing times of irrigation, so it just takes pressure off the main system. We're creating a range of case studies currently, so hopefully we will have enough information there so that you can actually look through a portfolio of different options, projects that have happened previously, some of them that are in the process of working at the moment, where we can pick up what's worked, what hasn't worked, but also to look at maybe some of the mistakes, the 2020 hindsight. You know, what an operator maybe did that they wouldn't do this time, or they might do it in a slightly different way, so that you can learn by others' mistakes. So hopefully it will smooth the process for you. And by the same token, if you can then create case studies around what you do, then that would be really helpful as well. But to highlight the positive actions that we're doing and undertaking here, the responsible attitude of the leisure sector. And we're going to have, hopefully, we're going to create a lot of PR around that so that we can actually use these as vehicles, if you like, the water charters, so that we can encourage action and awareness by your stakeholders. As I say, the key thing here is we don't want to get anybody at a golf facility, a course manager or general manager, sacked, but we have to create the awareness that the committees or the management structure have to be aware that there are going to need to be changes to the use of water on the course. There may be a need for increasing or building infrastructure to protect that future, and it is entirely likely that the areas of irrigation are going to be reduced. So there are going to be areas that are going to brown off and should be allowed to brown off through dry periods. It's just the naturalization, if you like, of the management techniques. But we need to create that awareness so that we don't end up with course managers getting it in the neck, or the general manager getting it in the neck every 5 minutes from members complaining because they don't understand. So the water charters have been seen as the opportunity, the way of actually getting that information out there, and publishing the water charter on your website, making that declaration for the associations as well, hopefully will take some of the pressure off you, and hopefully will increase some of the awareness. Hopefully this presentation has given you a little bit more background to the Water Use and Resilience project. If you would like any more information, there is information available on our website, www.esinternational.co.uk. You can see on this slide here, you've got my contact details, my mobile number and my email address. So if you would like to find out any more about water use and resilience, the work that we've been doing on this project, the likely outcomes, how you might be able to get involved, if you would like to adopt the Water Charter for your club, then please do get in touch. But I'd also like your feedback. This process, as I say, has been collaborative. We've been trying to get information so that it doesn't become just a project which dictates what happens. We've been trying to have those discussions about the best way to find those solutions, to work with operators, to get real on-the-ground practical backup and information so that we can build that into the project as well. So if you'd like to comment, please get in touch. In the meantime, thank you very much. We will be providing more information on the project and the outcome over the next few weeks. But in the meantime, thank you for listening.